All right, guys. So at this point, you have to be pretty brave if you're going to be somebody that's going to go out on a limb and start an audio company, especially in this really flooded market. So if you're going to come out with something new or you're going to start a new audio company, you have to come out with something that's either just really good compared to the competition, or you're going to have to come out with something pretty unique. Well, the IEM that we're going to check out today, which is from the company ooopusX, this is the OP24, OP.24, and it does actually have something pretty unique going on for them. And these only come in at $49. Now, first off, I do actually like the futuristic look that these have. They are using multiple drivers to try to separate the lows, the mids, and the highs. In fact, the OP24 is using dual dynamic drivers, which is a 10mm and an 8mm coaxial dynamic driver mixed with 4 balanced armature drivers in each IEM. So it's basically the dynamic drivers handling the low end, 2 of the balanced armature drivers handling the mids, and then the other 2 handling the highs or the treble. So this is what kind of allows these to keep everything pretty well separated. But what really makes these stand out is this little knob, this little dial that's located on these, and this allows these to switch into 2 different listening modes. So they're saying that this is a tunable switch located on the IEM itself. Now, I know this isn't the first pair that we've seen that's had this like tunable switching. We've seen some on the channel that's actually had switches to kind of pull from and dial it in on the outside. We've also seen some that come with a tool that you have to stick into the IEM to try to, dial it from one thing to the next. But as far as I remember, this is the first one that I've seen that actually has a dial on the outside. It makes it pretty easy to switch from both modes, which technically is switching it from 15 ohms to 27 ohms. And both of these are actually tuned a little bit different, which we will talk about this once we get to the sound. Now, the OP24 does not come with any kind of case. I don't know if they did this to kind of cut costs, but it does come with 2 different styles of silicone ear tips. And I actually like the clear ones on these when I generally kind of go for the cheaper, more flimsy silicone ear tips. So I was kind of surprised that I went with these because they do actually affect the sound quality. So make sure that you test both of these to see which one kind of fits your listening taste or listening preference a little better. And then the cable that they've included, it is a braided cable and it's going for like a clear look. Now it is using the 2-pin connection, which again is probably the most common that we see in any IEM cable. And then the connector that plugs into whatever device you're using is just a standard 3.5mm plug-in jack. Now it doesn't include any kind of 1/4-inch adapter or 4.4mm balanced adapter. So if you're used to using those types with your amps or your DACs, you are going to either have to have one already or just order one to be able to use it on those type of devices. And speaking of those type of devices, I'm honestly going to say this pair really doesn't need an amp. It doesn't need one to, not necessarily get decent volume out of, because these get really good volume with no issue. But honestly, it already has some pretty good punch and some brightness in the treble without even needing to plug these into an amp. Now, I am still going to say that you're going to get more out of them if you're going to plug them into an amp. And I'm even going to say that you're going to get more out of them in that 27 ohms mode plugged into an amp, because it seems to give it a little bit more body. It, to me, just kind of adapts to the sound a little bit better in that mode while plugged into an amp. And so with that, let's just go ahead and talk about the sound. And to start with, let's go ahead and talk about both of the modes. And we'll kind of look at the graph here. But on mode 1, which is the one that's 15 ohms, it's actually brighter with the treble for sure. I mean, it does have the mids kind of like left alone. In the bass, there's a slight dip compared to mode 2, but there's definitely some more brightness in the treble, so it's more detailed in that mode 1. But in mode 2, which is the 27 ohms mode, there is slightly more punch to them. It kind of lets the bass get a little bit more loose, a little bit more aggressive. The treble on these are affected the most. This is where it kind of dials it back some, or maybe it's just letting the bass kind of warm up the treble a little bit. So in my opinion, it feels like it sounds a little bit more natural in mode 2 than it did in mode 1, because mode 1 just had that peak with the treble. It's just a little bit brighter, but neither one of these modes get harsh. It doesn't get like that over sibilant sound with the S's. They both kind of feel like they're not necessarily held back, but they're dialed in some where it keeps it from being way too aggressive, way too dynamic and anything like that. Where I am still going to say though, if you're looking for neutral or if you're looking for a flat sound signature, there is no way that you're going to get that with these IEMs. You know, no matter which mode you switch it into, and even if you don't use them with an amp and you're plugged straight into a device, you still are going to have some pretty punchy low end, and you are going to have some, for the most part, slightly bumped up treble. So this is not neutral in any way. In fact, I would say the only thing that's kind of flat or kind of neutral, if you want to, you know, word it that way, is going to be the mids. And it's not to say that it's dull. It's just saying that they're not trying to pump it up where it's really aggressive and like right there in your face. But they also don't leave it, you know, left alone where it kind of gets buried in the mix, where it gets lost or feels like it's behind everything else. So I was really surprised with the way that these were tuned, and I actually like both mode 1 and mode 2. But I am going to say that I do prefer mode 1 just because I like a brighter treble, and I don't feel like mode 2 is giving me as bright of a treble that I like with mode 1. Now, when it comes to the soundstage and the sound imaging, this is definitely not the most wide open IEM that I've heard, but it still was surprising that it kind of felt like you were in a large room, especially considering that these are a fairly dynamic tuned IEM altogether. And so overall, I feel like this is the right approach from a new company. Now, I do wish that it came with a case. This is just something that I like to have to keep everything in one place. But I understand, again, if they did have to do this to cut costs. But I really like the tuning dial that these have, and I like how easy it is to just switch from one to the other. You don't have to have a tool. You don't have to do anything special other than to just turn the knob on both IEMs. And I just really enjoyed listening to these over the last month, or actually longer than a month that I've had these. I've used them plugged into my desktop. I've used them plugged into my Legion Go. I've used them just plugged into different things. I've used them with Bluetooth adapters, and they just happen to work really well with everything that I tried them on. And so I think they're just an incredible value, especially with the fact that they come in at only $49. So yeah, I highly recommend these. But guys, that wraps up my video on the ooopusX. I hope that I'm saying the company name right, but these are the OP24s or OP.24s. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Thank you so much for checking out all the other videos. And as always, make sure to stay tuned for more.